This is the intro song. This is the intro song. Oh, how I love the intro song. Let's learn a little bit about the game known as Dungeons & Dragons. D&D is short for Dungeons & Dragons, which is what Dungeons & Dragons is mostly referred to as, D&D. It is a fantasy role-playing game that was started in 1974. Dungeons & Dragons gave birth to the genre known as role-playing games, or RPGs, MMORPGs, meaning massive multiplayer role-playing games. These games use Dungeons & Dragons as a template for their games, starting with humans, elves, dwarves, etc. It all originated and was put into a game from Dungeons & Dragons. So why should we play D&D? We already have so many more computer games that do awesome at giving us the feel of an RPG element. Well, with Dungeons & Dragons, you're not stuck in a video game. You have no limits on what you can do. The rules are used as a guideline. You can bend, tweak, change the rules entirely to fit what you want, or what your group of friends want. After getting the core rulebook version 3.5 or 4th edition, whatever you prefer, you will need many dice. At minimum, you are going to need a 20-sided die, an 8-sided die, a 12-sided die, a 6-sided die, and a 4-sided die, and lastly, a 10-sided die. You will need, at bare minimum, one of each. I would prefer getting many more, for reasons that I will explain later. I have a collection of 74 dice. Now, if you are just a player, that is all you need to play Dungeons & Dragons, excluding maybe a pencil or two. But for pen and paper D&D, really, the miniatures, the other core rulebooks, miniatures meaning the little people that are used to represent monsters and or the players, will usually be provided by the DM. And if not, then you and your friends can contribute and buy a couple miniatures, or you can just use little board game pieces like Monopoly. The miniatures are just little fancy type things to use to show off all the monsters and players and whatnot. Now once you get your Dungeon Master, your friends, your dice, your core rulebooks, and maybe a map or something, you're ready to play Dungeons & Dragons. Your first obstacle you must overcome is to decide what type of character that you want to play as. There is basically two ways to play Dungeons & Dragons. A, you can roleplay a lot. Or, your second option is intense combat. That is just creating a character or a campaign or story just based around hardcore combat and making the dungeons interesting and eventful. Most campaigns are somewhere in between, where there's some battles and intense dungeon play and some role-playing and interaction with NPCs, which is non-playable characters. Now enough with me babbling, let's get to the core of the game. There are 11 classes to choose from in the core rulebook version 3.5 of Dungeons & Dragons. And there are 9 races to choose from in the core rulebook version 3.5 of Dungeons & Dragons. 11 classes are as such: Barbarian, Bard, Cleric, Druid, Fighter, Monk, Paladin, Ranger, Rogue, sorcerer, and wizard. You can combine the classes in whatever way you choose. You can choose to stay as a straight fighter, or be a fighter/rogue. I will explain multi-classing further later on. But let's just say you want to be a fighter, which is a person who basically runs up to you and bashes you in the face with a sword or hammer or any blunt and or sharp and piercing object. So your choices for your races are human, halfling, gnome, half-orc, half-elf, dwarf, and elf. You get different bonuses and minuses for choosing different races. The human is the most standard race. They're the most versatile, and they have no minuses. But they don't have a lot of bonuses. Some people might flame me for that, and there's a lot of arguments about that, but we'll just say humans are the base race. Each race, excluding the humans, gets an ability adjustment modifier. That is, it changes their stats because you chose that race. The humans don't change at all. The dwarf get +2 to their constitution, but -2 to their charisma. The elf, +2 to their dexterity, but -2 to their constitution. The gnome gets +2 to its constitution, but -2 to its strength. The half-elf. This is also like the human. Their ability modifiers do not change. The half-orc. It gets +2 to its strength and -2 to both its intelligence and charisma. And lastly, the halfling. It gets +2 to its dexterity, but -2 to its strength. So obviously, if I was going to be a fighter type, I would not want a halfling. Unless I want to try something unique or fun to make my character something that not a lot of people choose. This is where the fun of the game comes in. Even though the rules, or the book, clearly suggests or hints that a halfling would not make a good fighter or a barbarian, you don't have to follow that. In fact, you can choose any race or class combination that you so desire. But for now, I'm just going to be a little wimpy person and choose human, the core race, as my standard fighter. But this concludes part 1 of my video tutorial on how to play Dungeons & Dragons. Make sure you subscribe or keep up to date on my videos so you don't miss the next parts of this series. On my next video, we will describe even further the different elements of this ginormous but fun game known as Dungeons & Dragons, or D&D for short. Stay tuned next time, Nixters.